Are we good now? Okay. Good morning. Today is Thursday, September 28th. Welcome to the Delta Stewardship Council monthly meeting. We are broadcasting today from the California Natural Resources Agency here in actually not in downtown, but kind of sort of downtown, 715 P Street in Sacramento. If you will please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. If I haven't said it, good morning and welcome, everybody. Emma, will you please lead us in a roll call?
Yes. Councilmember Burgess. Here. Councilmember Damrell. Here. Councilmember Weso. Here. Councilmember Lee. Here. Councilmember Maranian.
Here.
Councilmember Zingali.
Here.
Chair Medueno.
Medueno here. Great, we have a full house. We are now going to go into closed session, and we expect to be back at 10 a.m. and we will reconvene our open session at that time. Okay, thank you. Okay, Daniel is here. Awesome. Okay.
I'm here.
Perfect. Okay, I'd like to reestablish our quorum and reconvene our open session. We're coming out of closed session, and I'd like to report there is nothing to report at this time. We will now move on to public comment. And Emma, will you help us with our public comments?
Certainly. If any member of the public is interested in providing public comment on any agenda item during today's meeting, please send an email blue card to engage@deltacouncil.ca.gov. Be sure to note your name and the agenda item that you wish to speak on. When called, the clerk will unmute you.
Thank you for that, Emma. And again, this item is for the public to comment on any topic not on the council's agenda. And again, any comments on the items on the agenda will be taken during that time. Is there any public comment on this item?
No, Madam Chair, there is not.
Great. We will now move on to item 6, and that is the consent calendar. Are there any public comments on this consent calendar?
No, Madam Chair, there is not.
Okay. Council, is there a need for discussion on any items on the consent calendar? If not, I will entertain a motion to accept the consent calendar as presented.
Move approval of consent calendar.
Second that.
Motion by Maranian, a second by Burgess. Roll call vote, please.
Councilmember Burgess. Yes. Councilmember Damrell. Yes. Councilmember Weso. Yes. Councilmember Lee.
Aye.
Councilmember Zingali.
Yes.
Councilmember Maranian.
Aye.
Chair Medueno.
Aye. Motion passes unanimously. We will now move on to item 7, and that is the chair's report. I will first start by saying how happy I am to announce that the very last last remaining lawsuit against this council, or the council over the Delta Plan, was recently dismissed on September 1st in the Court of Appeals. This follows the council's trial court victory in November of last year and a Court of Appeal victory and presidential decision in June of 2020. In each instance, the Delta Plan was upheld, and the courts recognized the council's broad authority to adopt appropriate regulations as needed over time so that the state and local agencies will achieve California's goals and objectives in the Delta. I would like to thank our amazing and very dedicated legal counsel and the Department of Justice, and Schutt, Mihaly, and Weinberger. Specifically, I would like to extend the council's appreciation to Mr. Dan Siegel, Deborah Smith, Matthew Struhar, Alan Garber, and Gabriel Ross, and everyone else that contributed to this amazing victory. I would also like to thank all of our staff, including our executive officer, who has been at the very, very helm at this, and the council staff that contributed to, again, an outstanding result. And thank you all for your outstanding advocacy on behalf of the council to ensure that we have a strong Delta Plan, and that, again, we remain vigilant to help advance California's co-equal goals for the Delta. So again, maybe we can do a round of applause again. I have a few items, and I'm going to try not to belabor all of them, but just want to recognize a few key meetings and events that I was very privileged to be able to participate in. First, it was a tribal dinner that I had the pleasure of joining our executive officer. I believe it was last week. Everything seems to be running now. But what an incredible, incredible evening, an evening filled with culture, information, just so much vibrancy. There was a lot of cultural exchange, and to be able to witness again the tribal communities and their leadership recognizing again how important their role is in all aspects of the state of California with natural resources. And so it was really a privilege and a pleasure to attend. Also was invited and joined staff members at California Native American Day, which was last Friday. Again, to be able to see the walking, if you will, of all of the tribal leaders carrying their own individual flag, and to again recognize, and I'll actually share this, it was their motto, if you will, for the entire event, and it was called "Protecting Our People Through Sovereignty, Past, Present, and Future." And that is, again, what they continue to promise, to pledge. And so again, an amazing opportunity to be invited, and thank you staff for going out and again recognizing again what we do here at the council, and always acknowledging that we work in partnership, strategic partnership always with our Native American community. Also had the opportunity to join, although I wasn't able to attend in person because it was here in Sacramento and I had a scheduling conflict, but I did join staff who were in person to meet a New Zealand delegation who were here exploring, again, options and discussions of a previous conversation that they had with, I guess it was a few years ago. And so we had staff members there, our executive officer was there. Again, the exchange of ideas, what's happening in New Zealand, very similar to what is happening here in California. I'm telling you, council, we need to start a sister city region, sister estuary region across the world. Again, powerful discussion there. I, along with, I'm sure most of our council, were privileged to attend a Delta conveyance tour. I'm going to tell you that it opened my eyes to, again, to be able to go out on a bus and be able to stop at some key locations where the Department of Water Resources helped us to see, again, what it is that they're working on, what they're hoping to work on. I don't know, I'd like to extend the opportunity for any of the council members, if you'd like to just share your thoughts of, what you experienced on the tour. And again, feel free.
Well, It was an interesting experience just because most of the tours that we have taken kind of concentrated and focused on what's already there and what the issues are. And for the first time, you're starting to see what it could be. And it's a little difficult because you have to visualize some of it. There's a lot of technical information, but I think the staff was very helpful, and whoever was with us they were very helpful in explaining how it's going to work. You also see the importance of it. You see that by delaying it, we are really delaying the resolution of issues, uh, all water issues throughout the state. So I think it is, I highly recommend it. I think it's a very educational tour.
Thank you. And I just also have to comment that I thought it was a extremely educational trip. It was a great experience to be at the headwaters of I think Southern California's most important conveyance system, which is the California Aqueduct, that does so much to provide the lifeblood of Southern California. And it's an interesting state where the majority of the people live in the southern part of the state, and how we invest so much on moving water from one end to another. And water movement in our state is something that's very interesting, because every part of the state has some level of conveyance that connects to this whole system. It's just fascinating, but it puts this project into perspective. You get an idea of the magnitude of the project and how difficult it's going to be to undertake. But it's also fascinating how so much thought has gone into every aspect of how this project is going to function for the next 100 years, and what it's going to do specifically, and how hard it's going to be to build, and to the extent that it's going to be done with so little impacts on the surrounding areas, as much as that can be achieved for a project of this size and this magnitude. So that's, but it also reminds me in asking questions that this whole project is really intended to solve a problem that affects everybody. This is not just a project that will bring water to Southern California, but that a project that will correct imbalances that exist in the Delta. And it will also have in mind impacts that are already being felt by the people that live and work around the Delta. So that was a very fascinating reminder to me in going through this process. And also, I have to comment that the Delta is a very beautiful place. And I was just really moved by the beauty of the whole location, and just the productivity of this area in terms of farms and communities and towns and cities.
Thank you. Looks like council member, yeah, just Judge Damrell.
I was impressed on this trip by the equipment. Thank you. Okay. By the fact that this is one state, and we have one water system that ideally, and to break that down in chunks that we would understand was remarkable. And I really salute the DWR folks, and just the idea that we can, deal with the kind of problems from a standpoint of one system of water. And I think that is remarkable. And if we can, that would be wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you, Judge. Councilmember Burgess.
Yeah, I appreciate the effort that they put and gave us their time to explain things. I learned some new things, and it was a wonderful day to spend in my own backyard amongst my neighbors and the people that I get to represent. So I appreciate everybody going out and seeing the project, and it was good time spent. Thank you.
Great. Yes, Councilmember Lee.
Yeah, two things for me stood out. One was that I know that, obviously this project's going to come before the council for a decision at some point. And we get, regular updates from DWR regarding that. And I think that those updates will be better contextualized by me because of the trip. Kind of makes more sense and a better understanding of where they're at in their timeline on things. And the second thing that was really impressive to me was what a big feat of engineering this is going to be, from everything from these underground drillers to the way that the fish screens are going to work. It was so much thought and so many years worth of planning already having gone into this. It just really was impressive.
Yeah. Thank you. I appreciate you all providing your thoughts and feedback. I think that's super important. Again, thank you all for being able to participate.
Chair, do you mind if I say something? really quick?
Absolutely.
Thank you. Yeah, I got a lot out of the tour. For me, having been around for a couple iterations of the planning of a project like this, it really helped me understand the differences between the current proposed project and preferred alternative versus what we analyzed deeply in 2018 with Water Fix. So that was very helpful, and you're spot on, Councilmember Lee. It really helps with contextualizing not just what we hear from the department, but what we hear from concerned citizens, and where we can become better advocates to make sure that this project can be consistent with the Delta Plan, and where we can just make sure that we're performing our role of oversight and protection of the Delta as well. I wanted to point out to anyone listening that some of the videos that were shown to us on this tour are available on the DCA website, and I don't remember the exact website right now. I'm sure it can be found easily with Googling. But for those of you who aren't able to go on the tour, it's a very helpful visualization of proposed project features through a series of videos they've produced. Highly recommend those. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much.
How important that was in understanding how hard it is going to be to build, to go through different phases of this project, that it is a complicated project, the scale, the issues, the complexity. So I think it's good for us to know that this is not just another simple project. And I appreciate all of us seeing it now.
Yeah. Thank you. Again, really appreciate everybody's thoughts and opinions, and again, taking the time to go out and see for yourself. Very, very important. It's been a busy month. I also participated in the Fresno State Water Forum, and it's no secret, as we continue to hear about, what's happening in our state, what's happening with climate change, what's happening again with water, and to attend this forum and to hear, from state leaders, even the president of Fresno State University, who talks about, again, the great San Joaquin Valley that produces over 250 crops, commodities, again, that not only feed our great state of California, but really feed the entire country. And recognizing that the water is just not there, and how many thousands of acres of land are going to be fallowed, and what happens, and the impacts, if you will. And so for me, it's a constant reminder of how do we, again, continue to build relationships throughout the state, throughout the San Joaquin Valley, and again, recognizing that we have a role, we have a responsibility, we should be doing everything we possibly can to, again, strengthen, nurture, and increase, again, our support of what else can we do? Have we turned every rock, and recognizing that there's got to be more that we should be doing, again, to ensure the sustainability of our agriculture for, again, for us, for society. So great discussions, a lot of collaboration, state water agencies there, the private sector there, the education, the academia was there. Obviously, our agricultural leaders were there, and again, just powerful discussions, and more to come on that. Also had the opportunity to attend the Delta Champions Dinner, which was scheduled a little over a week ago. And I just want to highlight that one of our former council members, Supervisor Donna Toldy, was recognized as a champion for this year. And so it was great to hear him speak. It was great to see him being recognized. It was a great evening. a lot of power, a lot of influence, a lot of emotion. Somebody mentioned earlier, I think it was Councilmember Hueso, who talked about, how great it is to go out to the Delta and see, again, how much the Delta is, what the Delta is. I can tell you that having been in that dinner and being surrounded by so many, and I see our friend here is Tom is here, and so to hear all of the history and how proud people are, how proud they are of their Delta, how proud they are of being there for generations. And I got to sit at a table with a farming family, the Baker family, and they shared again stories of how they ended up in the Delta, their grandparents in the late 1800s, and to again recognizing that the Delta is an amazing place. And so to the degree that we can, we have to absolutely do everything to protect the Delta for what it is. It is absolutely an amazing place that people continue to call home. And with that, also had an opportunity to attend the Clarksburg School Open House with our executive officer, talk about history. And again, the passion. You've got some volunteers, community leaders that are trying to rebuild, not trying, they're rebuilding this schoolhouse. And there's a big picture there in the schoolhouse, and you look at all the school children that were there, and I'm going to say that the vast majority were Chinese children. And so that also reminds me of how much, again, influence we've had from the immigrant communities, from the Chinese, the Filipinos. Again, there's so much to be said about all of the cultures that have come, all of the traditions that have been brought to the Delta as a result of all of this immigration. And so again, I just found it fascinating. And then lastly, I just want to talk about a USGS hydrology tour that I was very privileged to participate in with Councilmember Moranian, who invited a delegation from Southern California. And let me just tell you, we had some very influential people. We had people from the LA City Council. We had people from actually board members to the Los Angeles Department of Public Works. We had Barbara Romero, who is in charge of LA Water and Sanitation. And when I hear people from Southern California come and experience the Delta and that say, wow, never have I seen anything like this. We see the Delta on maps, didn't realize how big, how complex the Delta is. And we thought we were dealing with complex issues in Los Angeles. It is nothing in comparison to the Delta. So one, I appreciated that. Two, I also appreciated them saying, it's nice to actually come and actually see the Delta for what it is. It's not just water, it's agriculture, it's people, it's culture, it's communities. I really appreciated hearing that from some of our members of the delegation who, again, from being from Southern California, have never experienced it, to hear, again, them process, if you will, that their water that does come from the Delta has to be protected. It cannot be taken for granted. And so I want to thank Councilmember Moranian for your leadership, for making this trip, and for inviting this delegation, because I think those are the important discussions that need to be had across the state level. So I don't know if you wanted to just chime in on that. And I had a video. Do we have video or photos? No? Okay.
I wanted to
That's okay.
thank first our chair for pulling this together, just because there were a number of different agencies involved, and we have our staff. Jessica Pearson was there, Brandon was there, and we're instrumental in giving this group a very good perception and understanding of, from different point of views, of what each of these agencies do and how they play. And in their turn, we have to understand that they're in LA, and the biggest or their charge right now is to create local waters, and yet half of all of the water in LA still comes from the Delta and other sources. And somehow, because they've been so focused on creating their local sources and Measure W that captures stormwater and all that, they almost have not had any focus on the Delta. And all of a sudden, we all have our own world, and in our world we do big things, and then all of a sudden somebody opens up another door and you see the rest of the world. And And it was really that. It was for them to see this water source that, you know, provides 50% of all water in LA and where they are. And again, I think it was not only we learned a lot, we at the same time that we showed a lot, we learned a lot too of, you know, how different point of views come together. USGS did a wonderful tour in understanding, you know, an explanation of all the projects. Jessica and Brandon did a wonderful job, but I just want to one more time thank our chair, Virginia Medwenio, for pulling this together. It was a hard job to coordinate all this. Thank you. I want to
Thank you, Maria. Well, no, I'm not going to take any credit. I want to acknowledge the USGS team, John Burrow and Brian, who, again, without their leadership, we wouldn't have been able to do that. So USGS, thank you. And again, to Cindy, thank you for always keeping us together, coordinating, and to Brandon, always, you're there to save the day. Thank you so very much. And Jessica, again, always lending that words of wisdom and saying, "No, Virginia, do you really have this together?" So thank you. Again, we have an amazing team. We'll now move on to public comment. Are there any public comments on this item?
No, Madam Chair, there is not.
Very well. We will move on to item 8, and that is our executive officer's report. And for that, we have, again, our executive officer, Ms. Jessica Pearson.
Thank you, and good morning. I also wanted to add my thanks to Beck for driving one of the vans on that,
Oh,
that,
yes.
that tour as well.
Thank you, Beck, for the van driving.
Unsung heroes. So I have a couple of announcements, and the first is some very good news for the council, on top of the good news that we got earlier this morning. So I'm pleased to share that the council has completed a significant milestone, as charged by the legislature, by finalizing the regulation that will implement the Delta Levees investment strategy, and this will take effect January 1st, 2024. So until now, the state lacked a comprehensive and transparent method to prioritize investments in Delta Levee improvement and rehabilitation projects. It's an understatement to say that this was a challenging project. And it was given to the then new council by the legislature after some previously failed attempts. The priorities set by the council are intended to reduce the likelihood and consequences of levee failures, thus safeguarding lives, properties, Delta communities, and state interests. The new regulation requires that the Department of Water Resources submit an annual report to the council, including specific information describing Delta levee investments relative to the Delta Plan's new priorities. And we're planning for the first of these reports to be received by the council in December. My hope is that with this prioritization, we can collectively work together to make the case for sustained and increased levee funding to combat the ever increasing flood risks to the Delta. These levees protect not just people, they also protect vital state infrastructure and much more. So finally, I want to express my appreciation to all of the council staff and past and present council members who have put in monumental effort to get the D-list over the finish line. I also want to thank the many stakeholders who have stuck with us and participated and provided necessary feedback to improve the D-list and ultimately make it better. So good news there. I'd also like to announce that the council's Delta Plan Performance Measures Guidebook has been updated and is now available. The Performance Measures Guidebook describes how the council uses data to track the health of the Delta, and it's intended to be a companion tool for users to the online performance measures dashboard. The guidebook includes information on new and updated ecosystem performance measures that were recently adopted by the council. It covers measures related to species, water flows, funding, and more. These measures are an essential part of enabling the council's work towards a restored ecosystem that is more resilient to climate change, and it helps us adaptively manage the Delta Plan as we go forward having this information. You can find the guidebook on the council's homepage under the Performance Measures tab. For covered actions, last month I reported that on July 31st, the Department of Water Resources submitted a certification for the Central Valley Flood Protection Plan. The project's 30-day review period expired on August 31st, and there were no appeals. I also have 2 outbound comment letters to report. First, on September 6th, the council sent a letter to the Department of Water Resources regarding the notice of preparation of an EIR for the long-term operations of the state water project facilities in the Delta. This is often referred to as the LTO, long-term operations. This project would approve long-term operations of the state water project facilities in coordination with DWR's implementation of the proposed voluntary agreements. Those voluntary agreements are meant to provide an alternative approach to meeting the requirements of the Water Board's Bay Delta Water Quality Control Plan, or the updated plan. The project describes updated pumping criteria and measures to avoid, minimize, or mitigate impacts to endangered species in operating the projects. Our letter states that the project may meet the definition of a covered action and invites the department to meet with the council in early consultation to discuss the project and mitigation measures to promote consistency with the Delta Plan. The second letter is to the Yuba County Water Agency regarding their notice of preparation for an EIR for the extension of the Lower Yuba River Accord Water Transfer Program. The Water Agency intends to extend its water transfer program from 2025 through 2050. And the letter states that the project appears to meet the definition of a covered action, and we outline recommendations, including the need for Yuba to demonstrate consistency with regulations in the Delta Plan regarding best available science, reduced reliance on the Delta, and transparency for water contracting, among others. The letter invites Yuba Water to engage in early consultation on these matters. In personnel announcements, Miranda Tilcock has joined the Delta Science Program Science Communication Synthesis and Decision Support Unit. Miranda comes to us from the Center for Watershed Sciences, and she received both her bachelor's and master's degrees from UC Davis. During her studies, she helped develop a method of using fish eye lenses to reconstruct the life history of fish. This was work that was recently featured on WNYC's Science Friday, as well as in other news outlets. At the Council, Miranda will be leading several synthesis and communication initiatives, including facilitating synthesis working groups that we hold in partnership with the National Center for Ecological Analysis and Synthesis, and she will be leading planning efforts for the 2024 Bay Delta Science Conference. Our outreach and highlights report and active projects lists are available in your packet and online. Of note, the August Outreach Highlights Report debuts a new metric that shows us kind of a statewide breakdown of the audience for our website, and it's interesting to note that we have a good share of interest across the state. Next, I'm going to turn to Jorge Aguilar, who's going to introduce our new legal extern.
I'm very happy to inform the council that we have a legal extern that's joined us through December. Rebecca Wilson is currently a student seeking her Master of Laws degree from the McGeorge School of Law, in water and environmental law. She has her JD from also McGeorge with a concentration also in water and environmental law, a master's from Cal State University in Sacramento, and then her bachelor's from the University of Pacific. We're excited to have Rebecca, and she's going to be working to look at a lot of legal issues that we were hoping that we now finally have the capacity to look into more closely.
Oh, welcome, Rebecca.
I'll invite up Brandon Chapin for our legislative update.
Good morning, Chairman Dwayne and council members. So as you may all know, the legislature just recently ended the first half of its two-year session about a couple weeks ago. So they are on recess for the rest of the year. But I want to highlight a few bills that made it through or where they are in the process, just to give an update on some of the bills I've updated on in the past. So next slide, please. The first is SB 544. From Senator Laird. So this deals with the Bagley-Keene Open Meeting Act. So this is all about how we run our public meetings here. And the intent of this, there's the COVID restrictions that COVID exemptions that went into place with COVID to allow teleconferencing, and we have a whole new world of primarily being able to attend meetings by Zoom. So this bill attempts to try to mesh those two together. What the old rules with Bagley-Keene were and what this new future looks like. So what this bill sets up is kind of two tracks that the council can take, and the Delta Independent Science Board and the Delta Plan Interagency Implementation Committee. So the first track is the original Bagley-Keene Open Meeting Act. So then this all has to do with advertising what addresses of anyone that's teleconferencing to attend the meeting. So under the current Valley Keen, if a member is teleconferencing for a meeting, they have to put on the notice where they're attending a meeting from, and it has to be publicly accessible. So that's still in place. Council can still go that way. Another option is that council members could attend the meeting remotely, not have to advertise their location. However, if the council goes that route, then at least half of the council has to be in one physical location. So a quorum has to always be in person. Anyone that attends the meeting remotely has to ensure that their camera is on for the duration of the meeting. However, if the camera fails or internet access issues or anything like that, the member just has to notify the public meeting of why. So just make a statement that my camera's not working or anything like that. And then the other important part of it too is that if the way that the public can attend the meeting remotely, so via Zoom, if that fails, then the council has to end its meeting. So that's the other portion of that as well. So yeah, so some new rules that would go into effect this all goes into effect in January as an option. Jorge and the legal team are going to be looking into this a little bit more, and we'll have more guidance on this bill as we get closer to that implementation. I will add that right now there was a budget trailer bill that passed near the end of session 2 that extends the exemptions for COVID for Valley Keen to the end of this year. So currently there's an exemption for having to notify of addresses as well for teleconferencing at meetings. So yeah, I know that's a lot. It's very complex, very symbolic of just legislative policymaking, but happy to answer any questions on that particular bill first.
Any questions? Yes, Councilmember Lee.
Is this just waiting for the governor's signature then?
Oh, thank you. This has been signed by the governor. So this one has been signed and will go into effect in January. Thank you. I didn't mention that. All right, our next bill is AB 345 from Assemblymember Wilson. So this currently has passed the legislature and is sitting on the governor's desk for action. He has until October 14th to decide whether to sign or veto this bill. This lowers the barriers for restoration projects and flood protection projects. Specifically, it allows the Department of Water Resources and the Central Valley Flood Protection Board to be able to make payments on a contract for either of those type of projects up to 25% in advance. So currently the way the state does business of contracting is that if you have a contract, the contractor has to do the work and then they're paid in arrears afterwards. This bill would allow contractors to be paid up to 25% ahead of time to begin the work, and also lower some of that barrier that contractors might have to be doing this important work throughout the state. But again, like I said, this is only specific to the Department of Water Resources or the Central Valley Flood Protection Board. And then the last bill I want to provide an update on that I've mentioned quite a few times throughout the year is SB 586 relating to flood management. This bill originally exempted Mossdale Tract and the city of West Sacramento from achieving an urban level of flood protection as long as it met certain requirements that were in the bill. However, in the last few weeks of session, the bill was amended to only grant an exemption for an additional 2 years. They currently have an exemption of meeting the deadline until 2028. It would have expanded it to 2030. However, this bill also did not make it off the floor by the end of session. It didn't meet the deadline. So this has become a 2-year bill, which means that in January, the legislature will have that month to take action on it. Otherwise, it dies in the legislative process. So just an update on that one as well. So that one has not passed the legislature yet, not on the governor's desk. It's just awaiting potential action in January. And that is it for the 3 bills I wanted to provide updates on. You also have a bunch of bills in your legislative packets that might be of interest. Happy to answer any questions.
Questions? I think we're good.
All right.
Thank you so much, Brandon.
Okay, so looking ahead to the rest of today's agenda, we'll have our lead scientist report, and then the council will receive an update from Delta Watermaster Jay Ziegler. After that, Blake Roberts from the Delta Protection Commission will talk to us about their efforts to develop a management plan for the Delta as a national heritage area. And then finally, Delta ISB member Dr. Tom Holzer will join us to share updates on activities of the Delta Independent Science Board. So that concludes my executive officer's report. Happy to answer questions if there are any. Otherwise, thank you very much.
We're good. Thank you very much. Great report to our executive officer. Are there any public comments on this item?
No, Madam Chair, there is not.
Okay, I also, Daniel, if you have any questions, please make sure that I see you because I don't see you all the time on the screen. So just want to make sure that we have your
Thank you.
comments or questions. Awesome. Thanks, Daniel. Okay, moving on to item 9, and that is a lead scientist report from our lead scientist, Miss Dr. Laura Larson.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. It's great to be here today. And if I could get the visual up for this report, that would be great. So today I'm going to talk to you about mercury. Mercury is a potent environmental neurotoxin. And in fact, the idea of the Mad Hatter comes from the fact that hat makers historically used mercury in the conversion of animal furs to felt for hats. And with chronic exposure to that mercury, they suffered tremors, speech problems, emotional instability, and hallucinations, among other ailments. So mercury is a potent contaminant, and thanks to the gold mining era, mercury contamination is a major issue for California's waterways, including, or maybe especially, the Delta. Mercury here was used to enhance gold recovery in all types of mining operations, but especially in placer mining, which used jets of water to recover gold from the sand and gravels among California's riverways. Mercury, which originally came dominantly from mines throughout California's coastal range, was added to the sluices that were used to recover gold from sediments. And there it would amalgamate with the gold, and since mercury is very dense, it would help the gold settle out in the settling basins and get separated from the rest of the sediment. But the water flowing through the sluices was quite turbulent, and between that and the rough action of all of the rocks and gravel that were also flowing through the sluices, a lot of that mercury was lost to the environment. And I want to stress that this was a lot of mercury. The mercury used in sluices was about 0.1 to 0.36 pounds per square foot. Historical reports state that globs of quicksilver, which is another term for mercury, could often be seen in the rivers near these placer mining operations. And the USGS estimates that the total amount of mercury lost to the environment from the placer mining operations alone was about 10 million pounds, about 80 to 90% of which was in the Sierra Nevada. So mercury in the form that comes directly from the mines isn't necessarily a problem for human health by itself because it isn't easily taken up into living tissue. But there are processes that are very common in the environment that convert it to a form that looks a lot more like an organic molecule and can be taken up much more readily. These are microbial processes that happen in sediments, and in particular wet, waterlogged places where sulfur and a lot of organic matter is available, like wetlands. My late graduate school advisor at the USGS, George Aiken, used to refer to this carbon, sulfur, mercury trifecta as the mercury axis of evil. Keep in mind, this was during the George W. Bush presidency. Once this methyl mercury, as it's called, is taken up, it's not metabolized. So as you go up through the food chain, that mercury gets more and more magnified. And when you get to the fish at the top of the food chain that humans like to consume, you could be facing severe health threats to humans. So under the Clean Water Act, the water boards are required to regulate methyl mercury. Regional water boards establish regulations through their basin plans. For regulation of methyl mercury in the Delta, the Central Valley Regional Water Quality Control Board must adopt a total maximum daily load for methyl mercury as part of its basin plan amendment. Their strategy for regulation is to allocate required reductions in methyl mercury load to the major sources of its production in a phased adaptive management approach that allows regulated entities to conduct studies to determine the feasibility of load reductions. The scientific analysis that underlies the regional board's Delta Mercury Control Program revealed that wetlands in the Delta and flooded agricultural soils in the Yolo bypass are major sources of methyl mercury to the Delta, which would make the Department of Water Resources one of the key responsible parties for load reduction. Now, this is altogether a troublesome finding because, as I've discussed in some very recent lead scientist reports, there are many benefits for zooplankton, food webs, and Chinook salmon that come from managed floodplain inundation in the Yellow Bypass. But methylmercury contributions that come from these actions are a distinct drawback. So some more of the backstory here is that in 2021, the Delta Science Program convened a peer review panel to evaluate that Delta mercury control program. And if you're interested, you could find the report online on our website. Those of you who have been on the council through my term as lead scientist might remember that this was a topic I covered in that year. One of the findings in that report is that there are many gaps in scientific understanding of how flooded agricultural soils in the Yellow Bypass contribute to the methylmercury load and what, if anything, can be done. The research study that I'm spotlighting today, which is cited at the bottom of that visual, took a stab at addressing that uncertainty. Led by a researcher at San Jose State, but with close involvement of DWR scientists, the team tested the hypothesis that decaying vegetation might contribute a key part of that mercury axis of evil that allows for methylation of large quantities of mercury in the Yellow Bypass. To test that hypothesis, they conducted a field study and a laboratory study. For the field study, they harvested chunks of soil and whatever vegetation it contained from different locations throughout the Yellow Bypass, and with minimal disturbance, put those chunks into a large tub called a mesocosm. The different locations that they sampled from were grazed and ungrazed lands in the Yellow Bypass, as well as grazed land, which had been disked, meaning farm equipment was used to turn over the soil and bury the vegetation. The mesocosms were staged on the West Sacramento levee, where they would all experience identical temperatures, light, rain, etc. What the researchers found was that the mesocosms with vegetation from both grazed and ungrazed fields produced significantly more methylmercury than the ones that had been disked, where the vegetation was effectively buried. The laboratory study that they conducted involved collecting different amounts of soil and vegetation from the Yellow Bypass and incubating them under conditions similar to those experienced when the bypass is inundated. In that experiment, the investigators found that you need both the sediment, which is the source of the microbes and the mercury, and vegetation to produce the greatest amounts of mercury methylation, and that as you increase the amount of vegetation in the experiment, the amount of mercury methylation increases concomitantly. Together, these two experiments do affirm that inundating large swaths of vegetated floodplains does indeed have the potential to contribute in major ways to the Delta's methylmercury problem. In planning for multi-benefit wetland and floodplain inundation projects, this potentially adverse effect must be accounted for and weighed against the food web, recreational, cultural, and ecological benefits of these projects as called for in the Science Action Agenda. In the case of the Yellow Bypass, it may be the case that some reduction of vegetation load could be considered to balance those effects a little more. And this is just my own opinion. It would be worth seeing if there were hotspots in the potential for mercury methylation at distinct locations and focusing vegetation controls on those areas. Any questions about that article? Can it be removed, the vegetation or the mercury? No, it's in the sediments. It's a legacy problem. And the best we can hope for really is reducing the extent to which it gets methylated and taken up into those food webs.
Laurel, question. So I've been hearing about the issue of the mercury, especially in the Stockton area, the Delta, given that there's a lot of Asian communities, and that is that's their main, some of them, their main substance of protein. And so that's been an issue. Have we seen the levels of mercury increase? Are they stable? I've kind of lost track of that.
Yeah, I don't have good information off the top of my head on how those mercury levels have been changing over time. Certainly there was an increase from the hydraulic mining era. And one of the things that is done now is to issue advisories about certain types of fish to avoid. But getting the word out to those environmental justice communities that are relying on subsistence fishing remains a persistent challenge.
Great. Yes, Councilmember Hueso.
You had mentioned that mercury is a neurotoxin. Have we been able to study the effects on fish, whether it affects their ability to survive, the way they migrate, the way they behave?
That is a good question. I don't know, but I'll try to find out.
Oh, Councilmember Maranya and then Councilmember Burgess.
Okay. I have 2 questions. One is that you said 10 million pounds is still in the environment, not only geographically, but territorially. Where is that? Is it all in California?
So most of that is in the watershed draining the Sierra Nevada. So a lot of that does funnel through the Delta.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then in terms of how it's regulated now, could you shed some light on that?
Yeah, so there's a basin plan that each watershed covered by a regional board. So the basin plan is the mechanism through which those regulations are
I know, I
established
served on the water board.
Okay.
Yes, I understand what that is.
Yeah, so my understanding is that in those basin plans, these entities need to come up with, or the regional boards need to come up with a total maximum daily load, which is an allowable amount of mercury
Per day.
methylation that is allocated to the different known sources of methyl mercury. So, and then there are reductions that TMDL plan has to establish and allocate among those point sources as well. One of the tricky things is figuring out how much of those allocations are actually feasible for places like wetlands and floodplains where this methylation is happening in a way that we have little control over.
Because most of them in all watersheds exceed still the and TMDL, the mercury does. Would you know if all the 9 watersheds and water boards have the same limits for, where it's different, varies from?
I think it may be
different.
I think it may be different, but I don't have great confidence in that answer.
Yeah, I'm thinking maybe it is different by.
I think the reductions would definitely be different. I think the EPA probably has a fixed level of total of the concentrations that they're trying to
and
achieve.
it might be different from different water boards due to how much of it is detected in that watershed, correct?
Yes. Yeah. Well, in terms of the reductions,
Yes.
That as well as actually what's feasible to reduce. So in places where there are emissions coming from a point source like a power plant, it may be more feasible to achieve those reductions than in a wetland.
Yeah, it's a big discussion in water boards, and I think it's still so scary that there's so much of it not from the legacy contamination, but whatever happens today, that it's still there, and it's not. I mean, it is regulated, but still are not meeting the thresholds. So yeah, okay, thank you.
Thanks
Those are
for
my
the
questions.
question.
Councilmember Burgess.
Yeah, so there's a naturally occurring background of mercury because it's always been there. But I think it's interesting that historically they didn't know. So they were just doing whatever technology they had at the time to meet a demand that was there. And so in Contra Costa County on Mount Diablo, there is a mine that was a mercury mine. And it was very active for a long time. And then it wasn't. And a family bought it late 60s, early 70s as their retirement home. And shortly after that, the EPA was developed. And all of the tailings and everything that was coming out of that property that they had bought was now their responsibility. There's a reservoir between Mount Diablo and the Delta. It's the Marsh Creek Reservoir. And so a lot of the tailings have gone down there and are in the sediment. And the challenges have been related to what you're talking about. And so the decisions that were made based on technology that they didn't understand have had these impacts on personal, and now the county, now the water boards, now all of these different entities are dealing with technology that they just didn't understand. And so it's just kind of interesting. With the Mercury mine, Contra Costa County has offered to be involved in the cleanup, but not the responsible party, just to try to do it, because it's scary. We don't know, we're still figuring out how to do it. And then when we're trying to expand our capacity in the reservoir, we can't, because disrupting all that sediment and creating all those issues that you discussed is a problem. And then downstream, we're trying to do those types of things as well. And again, it's an issue of what do you do? And then we have vulnerable communities that are fishing for food, and we have to be on top of that as well. So it's just an interesting historical perspective of sometimes we do things that we don't really understand the impacts from, and then other folks inherit the responsibility of dealing with it.
Yeah. Thank you for those comments.
And we still don't do anything about it, or don't know what to do about it.
Well, yeah, we don't know what to do with it. And so that's the technology opportunity. If someone can figure that out, that's going to make a huge difference.
And to me, it seems clear that there is a need for work on where these hot spots occur, and I know the water boards are thinking about this too and doing that, but can we target these interventions, even if they have limited effectiveness, for those areas, so as to maximize benefits and minimize.
And as a
adverse
county,
effects.
we have these requirements, and we don't have any funds provided for us to tackle these things. So it's not only is it, dangerous and a problem, but we have certain things that we're supposed to be doing, and we're not given any funding to do it.
Yeah, and in most of the water boards, when you look at their TMDLs, mercury still exceeds. And the best they do, like sometimes they, find when there is source point. And if not, it's just there. Yeah, it is a challenge. It's a big challenge.
Yeah, I think an area that really needs a lot more research investment is water quality within the Delta, because there's this persistent problem. There are also contaminants of emerging concern. And one of the things I'll profile for you next month is recent studies that are coming out on what exactly wastewater treatment plants are putting out in terms of pharmaceuticals, UV filters, which are in sunscreens, and how are those contaminants likely to be distributed once they get into the environment. And there's really a lot we don't know. When you talk to the USGS, which is looking at pesticides and other emerging contaminants, the landscape in terms of what is being put into the Delta is changing so rapidly. It's really hard for scientists to stay on top of those impacts. And so one of the things that we will see in the upcoming Bay Delta Science Conference will be a focus on water quality. And I know that Jay Ziegler, who will be talking to you later today, I don't see him yet here, is going to make that a major area of emphasis for his term as well.
Yeah, actually, it's interesting you just mentioned that. So in one of our discussions with one of the tribal communities, that was the emerging theme, was water quality and water quality issues and these emerging contaminants that they never have experienced before. So yeah, it's going to be for a good discussion for sure.
Yeah, and it is certainly a big issue for tribal communities too, who will often put tugli in their mouths as part of their cultural basket weaving processes. Okay, that was a great discussion. I am going to move on to a brief report on some of the Delta Science Program recent activities. And speaking of some of these research ideas that we've been discussing, you're probably aware that the science program is poised to release a proposal solicitation notice later this year to solicit our next cohort of research projects that implement the Delta Science Action Agenda. That proposal solicitation emphasizes co-production and participatory research in which information is co-produced by both the researchers and the community affected by the research by way of early and frequent engagement. We recognize, though, that these partnerships might need a little bit of help to forge new connections between the researchers and diverse communities, because oftentimes those communities and the researchers might just have a hard time finding each other. To help those connections get kickstarted while there's still enough time to put together meaningful projects for the solicitation, the Delta Science Program has launched a survey to help identify researchers who would like help connecting with a California Native American tribe or community-based organization to collaborate on a research proposal. The survey was launched this month via the Council's listserv, and a link will be included in next month's written lead scientist report. In the meantime, please help us point interested parties to that recent listserv email. So in another item, the Delta Science Program hosted a public meeting for a peer review of the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation's water temperature modeling platform just recently on September 12th through 14th. So as a reminder, this is a second of 2 peer reviews or a 2-part series that we are facilitating on this topic. And the previous midterm review occurred in July of 2022. Temperature management is a key parameter for protection of species with specific cold water needs like Chinook salmon, and it's one of the most complex subjects related to operation of the Central Valley Project. The 2019 biological assessment proposed action, so this is the biological assessment leads to the biological opinions that implement the Endangered Species Act. But that proposed action includes an action for reclamation to collaboratively develop a new temperature model. The model is referred to as the Water Temperature Modeling Platform, and it could provide suggestions for operations and short and long-term monitoring in order to assist resource managers of major Central Valley Project reservoirs with balancing water resources for downstream uses as well as in-stream temperature needs. The peer review panel that is reviewing this water temperature modeling platform, well, tongue-tied today, has 5 hydrological and engineering experts from across the U.S. The public meeting featured 2 days of presentations by Reclamation's staff on the modeling platform's design and development, and then there was a 3rd day in which initial findings from the peer review panel were presented. This panel has been a huge success story for us and Reclamation. It's been extremely engaged and has provided helpful feedback, and the dialogue between panelists and Reclamation was hugely productive. The panel members will provide comments to improve the process of developing and implementing water temperature modeling tools and a framework for the Central Valley Project. And a final report of that panel review will then be available in early November. And then if I could get that by the numbers graphic up now, that would be great. I'm sure you've all heard news of the early season atmospheric river hitting Northern California this week, which sets off an auspicious start to the water year, which officially begins in 2 more days. So we're closing out this water year on a strong note, with the Northern Sierra having received 124% of the average amount of precipitation, that's 66 inches, bringing it to the 4th wettest water year on record for this region, behind water years 2016-17, 1982-1983, and 2018-2019. The Central Sierra received 161% of its average precipitation, or 64.4 inches. And for that region, it was the 3rd wettest water year, behind the 1982-83 water year and the 2016-2017 water year. The reservoir outlook is also strong, with Oroville at 136% of average storage for this time of year, the San Luis Reservoir at 193%, and Shasta at 131%. River flows are similar, with the Sacramento River running at 125% of average and the San Joaquin at 118% of average for this time of year. And then last, combined diversions from the Central Valley Project and State Water Project are at 95%. That's all I have for you from this month, and I'm happy to take questions from the council and the general public.
Yes, Councilmember Burgess.
Thank you for your report. I've been watching what's happening in New Orleans with the saltwater intrusion. They're calling it something different, but it's basically that, and all of the action that they're doing. It's just interesting to me that we're seeing the issues in the Colorado River, and now we're seeing it on the Mississippi River. At least we're trying to get ahead of those kind of things and make sure that we are protecting our delta and the water.
I think California really has the potential to be a leader here. We're also seeing similar issues of salinity intrusion that are becoming more of a threat in the Chesapeake Bay, particularly for the water supply of Philadelphia. And in fact, the council is sending the IEP lead scientist, Steve Culberson, to a meeting in the Baltimore area that is focused on how we could develop better collaborative modeling resources to address these types of problems. There are other delegates from California who are also attending this summit, including Joaquin Esquivel and Louise Conrad, the DWR lead scientist. And so I just think there's this groundswell of support for collaborative modeling initiatives to kind of think through future scenarios for salinity management and just other really tricky, almost intractable management challenges.
And
in
the
these complex
decrease in,
systems.
in
And the-
flow of
and the
fresh
decrease in
water.
Yeah, I
you
mean,
know?
yeah. With increasing temperatures, we're seeing increased evaporative demand everywhere.
And then we're seeing sea level rise. And even our chair talked about seeing those issues internationally too. So
Mhm.
thank you.
Other questions? If not, we will move on to public comment. Thank you, Laurel.
You're welcome.
Again, always just a great discussion. You always bring key issues to the forefront. And so looking forward to hearing more about the water quality issues and what's emerging there. So thank you again.
Thanks.
Any public comments?
Yes, Madam Chair, we have a public comment from Lawrence Abbott. Lawrence Abbott, you should be able to speak now.
I am, thank you. Hi, I'm a retired biologist and ecologist and one of the founders of the city of Lathrop. And I have a big concern. Last year, the drought was really a blessing in a way because we had the release from the dams at, pretty much maximum for many weeks to try to avoid catastrophic flooding. And in Lathrop, and the surrounding cities, South Stockton, Manteca, that whole area, we have plans on the books for a bypass similar to the YOLO bypass, the Paradise Cut bypass, but the plans aren't even anything comparable to capacity such as YOLO. So until we get an expanded bypass there in Paradise Cut, it seems like we're at incredibly high risk of catastrophic flooding, especially now that the levees are so high. What happens because the reservoirs are so, high compared to last year, but even compared to average with capacity if we get a year like last year or even a wetter year than last year? Is the planning going on? I know you can't just start releasing water in case we don't get all the rain, then we'd really be messed up, not having any water in our reservoirs. But I know it's not really your position to be talking about all these concerns at this moment, but I just want to put a bug in everybody's ear every chance I get, because I won't sleep well as a founder of the city of Lathrop until we get an expanded Paradise Cut. And I'd love your comments on this issue.
Sorry, I was having a hard time unmuting my mic. Thank you, first of all, very much for that comment. You're right that this is not something I'm terribly informed about and able to comment on, but I do know that the engineers at the Department of Water Resources are thinking through these potential scenarios for this upcoming water year and including them in their planning. I think, one of the things that the science program has really been promoting in terms of improving the best available science is more information that would be shared with municipalities, with the general public on these types of future scenarios at various timescales. Because I think that it would just be beneficial for there to be more transparency associated with the forward-thinking modeling and the modeling products as relates to water supply reliability and also flood control. So that is something that we're working towards within the science program. And we'd love to hear from you and others as we put out strategy documents in the near future.
Thank you, Lawrence. I just want to share, I think that you raised some really important and key issues. And so absolutely, as Dr. Lawson just said, we would love to hear more as things evolve. But yeah, certainly at the local level, we always talk about the state level, but certainly our cities, our counties that really get the impacts. And I don't need to tell Councilmember Burgess, Supervisor Burgess, again, it's super important to have these conversations and as early as possible. So appreciate your public comment, and we will stay vigilant on that. Thank you. Are there any other public comments?
No, Madam Chair, there are not.
Okay, and we are 1 minute early. I'm just so impressed. We are actually going to break for lunch for 40 minutes, 40 minutes, and we will reconvene at 12 noon with an update from our water master. So 40-minute break. How about that? Daniel, are you back?
I'm here.
Awesome. Okay. Good. Excellent. Welcome back, everybody. We will reconvene the Delta Stewardship Council meeting today, Thursday, September 28th. We will now move on to item 10, and that is a update from our California Water Master, Mr. Jay Ziegler, also known as Jay-Z.
Is on. There it is. I think now it's on. Right?
I have
Yep.
yet to meet your wife.
Right. Well, that was a fun evening in the Delta where I did have a chance to meet your husband, so that was great. And also spend time with other members of the board in the Delta recently, with Maria and Diane and company. And so it's been great to actually get around the Delta a bit. I would like to kind of take a quick moment of personal privilege, since most of you work very actively with my predecessor, Michael George. He was involved in just a horrific car crash on September 1st. It was a head-on collision. He was traveling with his two sisters and his sister-in-law. They were all hospitalized immediately after the crash. He's had surgery since then, and he's now back in California. He wanted me to assure everybody that he is really up and going. He's at his 10,000 steps threshold already, way ahead of schedule. Everyone's going to fully recover, but he's kind of been very actively in the thoughts and prayers of folks working around and in the Delta. So it's, anyway, the news is encouraging, but he's had quite a journey these past few weeks. So anyway, keep Michael in your thoughts, and for quick recovery. He is on the mend.
Thank you so much for that update. Yes, I sent a text message to him when I first learned, and I wasn't expecting a response, and he immediately responded back, and he absolutely was appreciative of anybody and everybody who was reaching out. Apparently, he was inundated with well wishes, and so it goes to show you how much our water masters are appreciated here. And so thank you for that update. I'm glad to hear that he's back in California. And I had fun with him too, because he was our singer, George Michael. So just want you to know.
Yeah, there you go. So I want to just kind of get into the report pretty quickly today. I don't have a lot of new information really for the council today, but I want to highlight our 2022-23 water data reporting, talk a little bit more about the Delta Response Pilot Program, and engage in the next steps in science collaboration. And maybe it'd be helpful if I had the clicker today. Do we have a clicker? Let's just jump in. All right.
Okay.
So I think substantially, what I want to share is this reporting via the Open ET methodology that really is designed to measure consumptive use. How much water are we using and losing in the Delta, and have that water use identified by a localized place of use, identified with an actual diversion point, and then rolling that up into a comprehensive water budget for the Delta. And the reason this is fundamentally important, as you all are aware, is that we've been debating what the actual consumptive use of water is in the Delta from time immemorial. And so this grounding this data in actual satellite-based, ground-based technologies to really understand consumptive use is really essential. And so what we've, and this process has involved really there's the top tier in the science community in developing the OpenET platform, integrating multiple evapotranspiration databases to develop a more reliable, accessible index for this work. And then candidly, at both the national scale, Desert Research Institute, NASA, the OpenET team, Environmental Defense Fund, and then local players in California, Cal State Monterey Bay, Habitat 7, Desert Research Institute, a number of entities that really have applied understanding in water data metrics and just developing an extraordinary level of confidence. And thanks to that level of confidence, in its first year of reporting, we are now approaching 70% of the 1,300 water rights holders in the Delta reporting on this one platform. So we will be getting the best data with the highest level of participation on a singular platform to really kind of open up the toolkit for everybody to better understand actual consumptive use in the Delta. And I think this is just really important. And I do want to give extraordinary credit here to the thought leadership and investment leadership of the Central and South Delta water agencies that really led the way in helping drive this level of adoption and frankly, really helping both the intellectual and necessary funding architecture at the investment level on the front side of this to make the process work. Next slide. So another reason OpenET is really important is that increasingly this is the indexing technology for consumptive use, not just in the Delta as I've discussed, but as we look at the greater Delta watershed. And what we're seeing across the Delta from an actual consumptive use analysis rather than a projected one or hypothetical one. And so I think just to review briefly, last year we looked at 33 projects, about almost 9,000 acres involved in projects designed to conserve water in the Delta. The projected savings of that was 3,300 to 5,500 acre feet. Our actual savings was less than a third of that. And what we actually compensated farmers for when you run the math is roughly $900 an acre foot, which is extraordinarily expensive water. And so I think we need to kind of think about our strategies, think about conserving water before it hits the Delta rather than in the Delta, because the science is telling us it's extremely hard to achieve meaningful conservation targets in the Delta. Next slide. So we went from that dry year to an extremely wet year, and now we have approximately double the number of projects. And encompassing more than 16,000 acres this year. And so we also have an on the ground field measurement level for ET to test the ET assumptions that we're getting from satellite data and other applied field studies. So we have a lot of this cross-referencing of ET data, again, to better refine and measure actual consumptive use in the Delta. Next slide. So taking all this forward, it's been great working with Dr. Larson. I'm so sorry to see her go. But trying to get, again, better integrated around one science in the Delta. I'm very excited to further advance the work that Michael George and the Office of the Delta Water Master team did to get us to this point on reporting and better integration with UC Davis and others that are actually doing water measuring metrics both in and above the delta, and I'm very excited about that. I think additionally, I'm looking forward to working with you all as we re-energize the DPIC process and better integrate science. And I think we just have an obligation to bring a level of transparency and integration, especially in this moment where we are, I'm ready to announce today that the state board will release tomorrow the draft staff report on the voluntary agreements, really launching the update of the Bay Delta Water Quality Control Plan. There will be a year ahead of us for input, review, comment around that plan as we look around the corner. And so I think maybe in my next quarterly report, we can kind of dig a bit deeper in terms of issues for particular analysis in looking at both the overall plan update objectives as well as how the voluntary agreement achieves those goals. So thank you, Madam Chair, and I'm happy to kind of jump in on any questions that you or other members of the council have.
Thank you so much, Jay. Questions? We'll start with Councilmember Lee.
I have a question about your chart. Could you maybe explain what all these other categories are? It looks like the 70% of the 1,300 water rights users that you mentioned are a combination of the individual ACP and the Delta ACP, but I was wondering what the other categories sort of meant.
Okay, so strict compliance reporters, and we have a couple of those identified in the Delta. So Metropolitan Water District is both a strict compliance reporter and has an individualized ACP because they are still putting gauges on all their diversions on the 4 islands. They actually informed me last week that they expect to have gauges on all of their siphons for the next water year reporting. It may be, so that will be not this current water year reporting, which actually opens next Monday for water year 23, but for water year 24, they will be fully gauged. So, which also gives us an opportunity to really calibrate across open ET findings for water usage as well as gauge diversion data directly. So an example, so the strict compliance methodology are those reporters, DWR, Metropolitan, that are doing actual gauged reporting. Those not in compliance are those that have just simply not yet reported, and we're wrangling those into the system. There's it's a relatively small number. Our office is focusing on about 42 folks that we just have not heard from in the filing process for the 2022 year. Still, and for the not yet filed, those are a number of those folks are actually people that we are working with to develop their shape files to put into to develop their polygons to align a point of diversion with a place of use and bringing them into the system. And then individual ACPs are kind of special consideration circumstances. We have one with Reclamation District 2068, for example, that looks at their system uniquely, and it's a little higher elevation in the Delta. They have an interesting mix of both tailwater coming into the district as well as pumping tailwater into their irrigation distribution system, and are working on a real-time reporting network. But those are some examples to kind of unpack the graph there.
Other questions? Wow, Jay, you're getting off easy today. As always, thank you. We really appreciate, again, you coming in and giving us these timely updates and reports. And more importantly, I just want to publicly thank you. It's been great. It's like we didn't even skip a beat, going from Michael George to you. You've done just an amazing job of engaging with our staff, our team, and you taking the time to be with us on some of these tours has just been great. So we really, really appreciate your time and dedication. So thank you.
Yes, well, let me reciprocate. And I want to say that I think it is really important to make our work more accessible in the Delta and bring both, getting together with both local stakeholders as well as having the opportunity to meet with water agencies coming into the Delta to better understand it. And I just think that work is so important to demystify what the Delta is, what our challenges are, and where we can make a difference together. So thank you, Madam Chair, for all you're doing out there as well.
Absolutely. And did you get the same
Maria,
question that I got from our Southern California delegation? When did California get a water master? Yeah, it was great. So thank you.
Yes.
Again.
All right, great. Well, thank you all for your time today. Look forward to continuing to see you all around the Delta this fall.
And
It's
thank
been
you
amazing.
for the tour that you did and explained to the Southerners what it is.
Well, I think you were doing a lot of work there too, Maria.
We
So
all
thank
tried.
you. Yes. All right.
Thank
Great.
you. Thank you,
all.
Jay. Well, given the expediency and quickness of our water master, we're going to actually switch items 11 and 12. Oh, I'm sorry. Is there any public comment on this item?
No, Madam Chair, there is not.
Okay, see, I didn't think there was. That's why I was reading a mind there. No, we always need to have and hear public comment. But we are now going to move on to item 12, and that is to get a Delta Independent Science Board update. And for that, I'm going to have but are we still okay? Are we okay? Yes. Oh, is that okay? Tom, is that okay if we put you? Okay. Blake, great timing. We were going to switch the items, but given that you just walked in, thank you so much.
Do you want to stay on the program?
We're gonna go back to the original. So we're gonna put you back, Tom. We're gonna put you back. But that was a good start right there. We appreciate that. Excellent start. We will now move on to item 11, and that is our National Heritage Area update. And for that, we are going to have Jeff Henderson make the introduction.
All right. Good afternoon, council members. Jeff Henderson, Deputy Executive Officer for Planning with the Council. We're here this afternoon to provide an update on the ongoing Delta Heritage Area effort. Both the Delta Reform Act and the Delta Plan call on our friends at the Delta Protection Commission to pursue designation of the Delta under the federal National Heritage Area program. And this is in large part to protect, enhance, and sustain the unique cultural, historical, recreational, agricultural, and economic values of the Delta as an evolving place, which you'll recall is one of the foundational aspects of the co-equal goals. Federal legislation establishing the National Heritage Area went into place in 2019, and since that time, the Commission's been working on a management plan for the NHA that's required to be approved by the Secretary of the Interior. The deadline for submitting that management plan is March 12th of 2024, which is roughly 5 years after designation. The management plan would outline the significance and the purpose of the NHA and outline the activities the Commission and a regional network of partners, including the Council, would undertake over the next 10 to 15 years. And now as the Commission's nearing completion of the draft management plan for the NHA, we've invited Blake back to share an update with the Council regarding outreach that's supporting the management plan, draft interpretive themes that are going to be used to convey the importance of the Delta as part of the NHA activities and facilities, and to share some ideas about ways that the Council can help to support implementation of the NHA. So with that, I welcome Blake.
Thank you. Apparently my timing was impeccable.
It was.
Sorry, I didn't realize that I was going to be on so early. Could you move to the first, I think this is the last slide, so if you could move. Great. Okay. As Jeff mentioned, my name is Blake Roberts. I'm a program manager with the Delta Protection Commission. I've been in this position for about 9 years, and it's really given me an opportunity to get to know the Delta in a lot of detail and to really enjoy all the things that it has to offer. And one of the things that I was brought on to specifically do was to work on cultural heritage. At the time that I came on, there was no National Heritage Area. We kept on waiting and hoping that there would be one. And then lo and behold, very quickly in 2019, Congress does not do anything very quickly often. They actually passed the John Dingell Act and created the Sacramento San Joaquin Delta National Heritage Area. One of the things I do want to mention just to begin with is that national heritage areas are obviously new to people here because Sacramento, the Sacramento San Joaquin Delta is the first and only national heritage area in California. But there are 62 across the country. Most of them are on the East Coast and Midwest, but they have been moving gradually westward. In fact, at the time that we were created in 2019, there were also 2 in Washington and 1 in Arizona that were created. So with that, I will, I just wanted to give you a sense of what a national heritage area is all about. Really, they are meant to be, it's national recognition, it's federal recognition, but it's really meant to be something that celebrates a national place, but done with local people and with local effort. And so that is really the point of a national heritage area, is to celebrate what is nationally important, but also give local people the opportunity to really determine what the direction will be. Next slide, please. So this gives you a sense of the boundaries of the National Heritage Area. This is not one of my favorite maps because it's a little difficult to read, but this is what National Park Service put together. As you can see in the upper right, that is Sacramento. And so the National Heritage Area actually goes up through the Yolo bypass. It is not in Sacramento City proper, but it does include much of West Sacramento. Goes all the way down to Stockton and just north of Tracy, and then takes a westward bend all the way through Vallejo and Hercules. So it takes in, it's really about, as you can see from the boundaries, it's really about water because water is really the critical part of this. One of the things I will note is that these boundaries have given me fits at times because they are sometimes a little difficult. There are resources that are just outside the boundaries, and we want to make sure that we don't ignore those kind of resources. But at the same time, we recognize that these are the boundaries that we have. So one of the things I will mention is in talking to the other national heritage areas, they have mentioned that they have not relied so much on maps showing specific boundaries. They've really tried to just support a general area without necessarily saying what's in and what's out. And so I think that will probably be our approach as we move forward. Although obviously we will be restricted on what we can spend outside of that boundary. Next slide, please. So the Delta Protection Commission is the local coordinating entity, and that is in our congressional legislation. So what does that mean? First, and probably the thing that's been occupying my time for the last 4 years has been developing a management plan. And that really determines what we will be doing over the next 10 to 15 years. National heritage areas are designated for a 15-year period. We hope and anticipate that we will be renewed for another 15. So really, we think that the management plan will, the life of that will go beyond just this current 15-year period. We also do public outreach. And I will say, we're a state agency, and so public outreach is really part of what we do anyway. Most national heritage areas are actually run by nonprofits, which makes us a little unique. But we really anticipate that everything that we do will involve the public in some way. And then in terms of implementing the plan, we involve a lot of different actors. And the one thing I will say about national heritage areas, and I repeat this like a drum, is that national heritage areas are about partnerships. They're about catalyzing different groups within an area to do things together that they wouldn't be able to do separately. And so in implementing our management plan, we're really going to be calling on different groups, on governments, nonprofits, to really work with us to implement these. And then obviously we also need to, the Secretary of the Interior and the National Park Service wants to keep track of us. We already submit an annual report to them just to let them know what we're doing. Next slide, please. So our outreach to date has been extensive. Since 2021, actually in the late 2020, we created the National Heritage, this is a little bit of a mouthful, the National Heritage Area Management Plan Advisory Committee, which we just call NHA Advisory Committee for short. And that really is the main body that we turn to when we are talking about what things will go into the management plan and what the National Heritage Area will be about. And that is that is composed of 15 members, regular members, and then we also have ex officio members, including Jeff as well. So we really want to make sure that we encompass as many people in the Delta as possible, as many groups. And so often these are very well attended meetings, especially during Zoom, the Zoom era. But I think that we've really have gotten a lot of feedback from that group. And so we meet roughly once to twice, once a month or twice a month. I would probably say maybe 1.5, and that we've been meeting since January of 2021. In addition to that, we also have advisory task groups, which are in some ways sort of a subcommittee for the advisory committee. They are a little bit different though, because they have members of the advisory committee, but then they also have other people who are specialists in that field that might be helpful. And so the groups that the advisory groups that we have selected or created really align with the chapters that I'll be talking about briefly in the management plan. Tribal consultation is never ending. We do not anticipate that it will ever have a end. And so particularly because we really think that First Peoples deserve a lot of recognition in the Delta because of such an importance that they played here, and they continue to play here. So that is one of the things that we have done repeatedly. We have reached out to many tribes. We have talked to them, but this process will not end, and we will continue to do that as we move through the different projects that we have. We've done some public workshops, and those were sort of in the tail end of the COVID period. We had a couple of public workshops in Benicia and Walnut Grove. And then also we have the Delta Heritage Forum, which is our annual conference every year. And we've made sure to really highlight what's going on with the management plan at that time and really get some feedback. And then also online surveys and interviews. We wanted to make sure that we're talking to the people that are really important in the field. And so we've reached out and tried to get those stakeholders that we want to get more information from. So the management plan will be split up into 7 chapters. Introduction, obviously, and then interpretation. Interpretation, I think, is the second chapter because it is really critical to what we do as a National Heritage Area. Most people might not be familiar with what interpretation means, but it's really what are the stories of the Delta and how are we going to tell those stories? That's really what it's focused on. And so anytime you go to a national park, for example, and you are meeting with a person who is talking about the history of an area and the geological formations, etc., that person is an interpreter. They are interpreting what resources, the resources that are there, and what it means to us. And so I'll be going into that a little bit more detail about those interpretive themes in just a moment. Resource stewardship and enhancement. There are a lot of resources that ranges from buildings to landscapes to archaeology. There's so many different types of resources in the area. Events, those are the things that we focus on. So in terms of stewarding those things, we want to make sure that the stories, that the resources that are there are well protected, and that we are able to enhance them in many ways. One of the things that struck me when I first came to the Delta was how lucky we are that there are a lot of places that really haven't seen a lot of development that has destroyed old buildings. But at the same time, those old buildings need help. So that's one of the things that we want to focus on. Heritage development and tourism. Obviously, one of the things that we want to think about is how do we draw people into the area, and how do we do it in a way that's sustainable? One of the issues that has come up repeatedly is we would love to have tourists, but what about our roadways? As you know, getting around the Delta is difficult because the size of roadways is pretty limited. You can't really put more people on those roads very easily. And so that's one of the things that we will need to reckon with as we go along this path is how do we get people around the Delta in a way that's sustainable, that doesn't jam up the roads in the area. Partnerships, as I mentioned before, that's really what's key about National Heritage Areas. And so we want to have a chapter that specifically calls out those groups that we are partnering with already or anticipate that we will be partnering with. The business plan really defines how we're going to be moving forward. And that, I will say, is a bit of a challenge. A state agency has a lot of assets, and there's a lot of great things about being affiliated with a state agency. We're stable, we have ongoing funding, but we don't necessarily have the flexibility that we need in certain instances. And so the business plan really is sort of, we're not necessarily determining what we're going to do in order to be more flexible, but we're at least laying out ideas for what we might have to do in the future in order to move things forward and be able to get the work done that we need to get done. And then obviously the implementation plan, that really is where the wheel hits the road. Next slide. So I talked a little bit about interpretation. Interpretive themes really are important from this one perspective. How does a place connect with you? Why should you care about a building? Why should you care about a landscape? Why should you care about an animal? And those are the things that we really are getting at when we put together themes. We want to develop themes that connect with people on different levels, on a thought level, on a feeling level. We want to make sure that people are connected with the resources in the area. Next slide. So in that effort, we have created 5 primary interpretive themes and then 3 supporting themes. And then underneath these primary themes, we also have storylines. So if you're thinking that maybe this is a little bit too general, don't worry, we get more specific when it comes to actually what stories we're going to be telling. One of the things that I now think about it, and it makes me laugh, when we initially created our list of themes, water was the last theme. And then somebody pointed out, why is water the last theme when it is is the most critical part of the Delta? And so really the water theme deals with the importance of water as a natural resource, not just for the Delta, but for the state. And we are willing, one of the things that we recognize is that we sort of have to deal with those controversies that come along with those requirements as well. We don't we don't take sides on anything, but we at least want to let people know that there are issues that the California faces when it comes to water, and also the importance of water as a passageway, especially. I mean that ranges for millennia. Sorry, but I would say, from the gold rush, you can easily imagine how many people came up through the Delta trying to find the gold fields. And that has continued on, and still you have shipping. Lots of shipping goes to the port of Stockton, the port of West Sacramento. That's critical to the state economy. Theme 2 is the beating heart of California, of natural California. And as I mentioned before, this is where I got a little poetic, but I wanted to make sure that we really recognized what the importance is of the area in terms of California. I think one of the things that we heard during tribal consultation was this idea of the Delta as a heart and the rivers as arteries throughout the state. And so that's really what we wanted to focus on, was sort of the importance of the area and how that radiates throughout the state in terms of natural environment, in terms of fish, in terms of birds, mammals, etc. Theme 3 is still a work in progress. I put this down, but I wanted to make sure that people realize that this is simply a draft and that we are still going to be working with tribes in order to refine this. But one of the things that we really wanted to emphasize with this theme was really how important California was in terms of a place for Native Americans, how abundant the resources were here, the diversity of the different groups. There was not just this tribe and that tribe. There were hundreds and hundreds of little tribelets. And so we want to recognize that diversity. There was a resistance during the colonial era. And I think, as I mentioned before, there's a reason why there's no missions in the Delta. And that is in large part because of resistance from Native Americans. Also, there have been tough times for Native Americans, especially when the malaria epidemic killed many scores of people in the area and really inhibited their ability to stay on as thriving tribes like they were before. Next slide, please. Theme 4 deals with a couple of things. One is reclamation and the importance of reclamation to the area, and how how special the Delta is in terms of public works. This was an amazing effort, and so we want to recognize that. But of course, the point of that was to farm. And farm they did, and we wanted to recognize the variety, of different crops that are happening here, the importance of different crop types, and for the nation as a whole, how these crops got out to the world as a whole. Finally, but certainly not last, was the cultural influences of the Delta. Many groups have come through the area, and so we wanted to recognize all those groups: Chinese, Japanese, Filipino, Italian, Portuguese, Mexican, Sikh. I'm probably forgetting something, but there's no end to the amount of groups that have come through the area, and so we want to recognize what they did and how they impacted the Delta and the state as a whole. The next slide, please. So these last 3 themes are a little bit more storylines that didn't really fit into the themes very well, and so we wanted to make sure that we called them out, that they were important, but they didn't, as I said, they didn't really fall into the themes. First was the importance of the Delta as a place of inland defense. Stockton, Pittsburgh, Concord, the area north of Concord, Benicia. There were POW camps around the Delta. We want to recognize the significance of the area when it comes to military, and so that's one of the things that we wanted to focus on. And also, I would be remiss if I didn't talk about probably one of the most important events that ever happened in the Delta, and that was the explosion at Port Chicago, just outside of Concord. Many people don't know that story, but it was a tragedy that affected many African-American sailors. And as a result, this happened during World War II, as a result of many efforts that happened, Harry Truman ended up desegregating the military. And I think Port Chicago played an important role in that. Also, we wanted to talk about the creative inspiration of the area, Joan Didion, and Jack London, probably all the different authors that have talked about the area. And there's lots of art, Wayne Thiebaud, Gregory Condos, just to name a few people that have really found inspiration in the Delta. And finally, recreation. That's how a lot of people know the Delta is through recreation, and that's an important part of the economy and an important part of the lifestyle of the area. Next slide. So what is the National Heritage Area going to do for us? One is obviously, and this is something that is already done, is it recognizes the national importance of the Delta. The things that have happened here are significant on a national level, and it's important to recognize those things. I could go on about all the things that are nationally significant about the area, but I'll just leave it at that. It's a source of pride. Obviously, there's a lot of people that are proud that we are the one and only National Heritage Area in California. We do get some federal funding. Right now, it's fairly limited. We get about $150,000 a year. But once we finish our management plan, we're hoping and anticipating that will pop up to maybe $400,000 or $500,000. And that is money that can be used in different ways, but I would anticipate at least some of that will be going out as grants to different groups. Access to National Park Service, that is invaluable. We are part of the National Park Service, and so as a result, we have an ability to talk to all the different people that are in different areas, and it really helps us tremendously. At the same time, we also have other national heritage areas, and that is a key way for us to learn. All national heritage areas come in all shapes and forms, and so we meet with them often to really talk about what's going on in their areas, what works, what didn't work, and that's one of the things that we'll be doing next week. Executive Director Bruce Blodgett and myself will be in Massachusetts and Connecticut for one of these fall meetings. And I have to say it's one of the more important things that we do during the year. And also assist in branding and economic development. One of the things that we'll be working on as we go on is a marketing plan that really integrates the National Heritage Area into it. Next slide, please. So what does the management plan do? As I mentioned, it describes what the stories are of the area, and I already went into detail about that. It identifies what resources are important about the area. Locke is a national treasure, but there are many other communities and many other places that deserve a lot of recognition. And so we want to make sure that all of those places are identified as important resources. It provides a focus for future work. Obviously, it will be the guiding document for what we do in the future, and will help us determine what course we're going to take. It engages potential partners in implementation. And so one of the things that we are doing in the process of doing is obviously identifying partners that are already out there and we already work with, but we also want to make sure that we're identifying those partners that we would like to work with in the future. And so that's an important part of that. And then, as I mentioned, it explores possible organizational arrangements. We want to make sure that we are aware of how we can function as a national heritage area that's efficient and effective. Next slide, please. So one of the things that Jeff wanted me to talk about is where the council might fit into this. I wanted to put down a list of things that are already documented in some of the work that we've done so far, but I want to say that this is this is just a list of a few items and not necessarily exclusive. One of the things that we have talked about before is that, and I know that during the tribal listening session a little while ago, we talked about the importance of giving tribes funding so they can attend meetings and that they're rightfully reimbursed for the time that they spend. And so I know that we've been working with the council and the conservancy on efforts to do that. This is something that we have done. We've been doing for years, is actually working together with the council on different projects that are out there. And so, for example, I mentioned the marketing plan update. That is, we're receiving funds from the council for that particular effort. So I anticipate that there will be a lot of those projects going forward that will be falling within that area. Also, we recognize that the environmental, the amount of agencies involved in environmental issues in the Delta are many. We do not anticipate that we are going to get too involved in terms of the projects that are already out there. And so we don't really want to occupy a space that is already too busy, but we do think that the National Heritage Area has the opportunity to educate the public about the environmental resources that are in the area, and that we're able to work with the council, with the Delta Science Program, in order to convey the importance of the area to the public. And also, one of the things that in talking to the Delta Science Program, one of the things that we were talking about was the possibility of developing a wide range of partners to work with. And so I think that's something that we will, like I said, we will be doing going forward. Next slide, please. So the schedule that we're under right now, we're under a pretty tight schedule. We are working on the management plan as we speak, and we are also sending drafts of our chapters to National Park Service, so they at least have an initial chance to review it. The National Heritage Area Advisory Committee and the Commission will get an opportunity to look at these documents later this fall, and at that point, we're hoping to release the document to the public. There is a CEQA NEPA document that will be going along with that, but we are anticipating doing a notice of exemption. We are at a categorical exemption on the NEPA level, simply because that's what National Park Service has asked us to do. I think they wanted to make sure that any detailed environmental issues really are kind of put forward in the heritage, in the projects going forward, and not in the management plan. Next slide, please. So once we finish the public review period, we will go back to the commission, get their approval, hopefully on a final document. And then, as I mentioned, and actually as Jeff mentioned, we need to submit our final plan to the Secretary of the Interior and the National Park Service by March 12th, 2024, because we were initially created on March 12th, 2019. So that is at least one of the things that that we're focused on right now is that date. I will be very happy once that day is passed. Next slide, please. So I wanted to at least give you a flavor of some of the projects that we've done so far. One of the things that we've worked on is community action plans. We've gone into those smaller, mostly unincorporated communities in the Delta and tried to identify what important things that they wanted to work on. And as part of that, we ended up doing a community design study. We did a community design study. One particular thing that came out of that was a desire for a gateway sign into Freeport. And so the Delta Conservancy right now is actually funding that effort. So one of the things that we've been, I think, successful in doing is sort of trying to develop projects that will eventually get funding. The Delta Anthology, Robert Benedetti came out with a book late last year. I'm trying to remember what the date was, which is an anthology of different writings about the Delta, and we were at least assisted him on the early stages of that process. Delta Narratives and Delta Curriculum. Delta Narratives was, I think, a really successful effort. We brought together a lot of different academics, museums, historical societies to talk about the history of the area, make sure that we have a story, a good handle on the history of the area. And so that the essays that came out of that have been really a gold mine for us in order to sort of look at our projects going forward. As part of that, we also developed a fourth grade curriculum. I also mentioned the heritage projects, feasibility studies, just for a second. There are three projects that we actually did a review on and tried to develop those projects further. Two of them are getting money from the Conservancy for that effort. Next, please. So where do we go now? I think one of the things that I'm really keen on right now is sort of looking at those projects that will bear fruit quickly. We want to make sure that we are able to build momentum and get people to know about the area. You probably have already seen, or hopefully you have seen, some of the signs that have been put up that welcome people to the National Heritage Area. Hopefully there will be more of those going up very soon. So that is part of that effort. America 250 in 2026, that is the anniversary, the 250th anniversary or birthday, I guess, of the United States. And so with that celebration, we really thought it would be important to reach out to all the different organizations within the area. And really, we see America 250 as sort of a coming out party for the National Heritage Area, and really trying to encompass as many groups as possible in celebrating all those things that are important about the Delta. Delta Heritage Courier is an existing newsletter we have. We've been doing the Delta Heritage Forum, our conference, every year for the last 5-6 years. Junior Ranger program is obviously something that we are keen on as well. We want to, we know that if we bring kids into the Delta, we bring parents into the Delta. And so that's one of the things that we're working on. I mentioned the marketing plan update a couple of times. Also passports. If you've ever gone to a national park and you've had those passports that you stamp, those passport books that you stamp, people love those. And so we want to make sure that we set those up throughout the Delta. One of the last things I wanted to mention was Operation Pollination. This is actually a project that started in National Heritage Areas, but has actually been picked up by Rotary International as one of their main things that they're working on. Really is about focusing on trying to develop habitat for pollinators throughout the United States. And so we're hoping to, as with other National Heritage Areas, we're hoping to really start to embrace that as well. So with that, I think that's the end of my presentation.
Blake, thank you so much. Wow, I know that there's going to be a lot of questions, but we're going to start with Councilmember Zingali.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for all this interesting work. I'm really fascinated by the interpretive themes, and I agree with you. They're important for my understanding of what y'all are doing. And I think you made the right decision in putting water up front. That feels absolutely right on. And I'd say about those first two, I think that's just a really strong start. I recognize or from when the tribes came to our board meeting, and it's beautiful to see it here. They both 1 and 2 feel like really excellent snapshots of water and the Delta as the beating heart of California. What I don't see and this is probably just because it's the top line, but I don't see a kind of contextual connection to the story of water and the natural environment, the fragility of that water and environment, the degradation, the issue of water quality, and the burden challenges of restoration going forward. So I wonder if you could just speak a little bit about whether there's a place for that in the interpretive themes and just doesn't show up on the surface, or if that's just taking on too much. I'd be curious.
No, one of the things that National Park Service has been very keen on is that they want us to tell the bad stories as well as the good stories. So that's one of the things that we want to make sure that we do. And so as part of those themes, as I mentioned, there's the interpretive theme, and then there's storylines that go underneath those themes. And so one of the things that we will be doing with every one of those themes is providing those stories. And one of the things that one of the storylines does deal with a lot of the challenges that we have with water issues. And we really wanted to go into depth about that because telling these stories is critically important. And I think in terms of, the Delta is obviously very fragile, and we want to make sure that that's conveyed to residents and visitors alike.
Thank you. So when you say the problems or challenges with water, you don't just mean the controversies or challenges around allocation. You're also looking at the challenges around quality and degradation and restoration.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
I mean, for example, one of the things that we did include as a storyline was the impact of hydraulic mining on the Delta around the late 19th century, and how important that was as actually a kickoff for the environmental movement in the United States. So that would be an example of something that we've done that has kind of talked about the quality of the water in the area. But obviously, I mean, that's a story that goes back a ways, but we'll also be talking about current issues as well.
And can I just clarify, this is a real minor point, but in our binder, there are 6 interpretive themes, and you said 5. Is that because on our 4 and 5 are actually one? They both sound like they're about farming. One says making the Delta into a garden, and the other is California's cornucopia. Is that actually one theme?
Yeah, the reclamation and the ag theme is one theme. And so that was something that actually National Park Service recommended that we do. So I think part of the reason why there might be some confusion is there were 6 themes, now there are 5 themes.
Makes sense. I was having trouble figuring out the difference between 4 and 5. So that feels, thank you very much.
And I will say that compared to other national heritage areas, we have a lot of themes. And as the fact that I'm currently writing the interpretive chapter, I'm really regretting that a little bit, but I feel at the same time that these stories need to be told.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Councilmember Zingale. Councilmember Moranian.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have a few questions and a few comments.
Sure.
And the idea that, this whole area is such a gem and such an important thing in the state, I'm always mindful that we talk about it with the people in the area, but do we reach out to the state, and to what extent? And this could have many different ways. Like, I'm looking like in Southern California, we create a little aquifer of sorts, and then we bring the students and we teach them about water recycling, and the classes come, on a little project, like a biofer or something. So how much we can do there, and how statewide could that be versus just local? I mean, we all have, and I'm not saying you are or this is, but we all have the tendency of preaching to the choir. Like, we know we are in this area, we learn about it, we go within 2 miles of, 3 miles of our area radius, and so I'm always concerned about that. So it's not as much of a question, or it's more of a comment and something that I would like to, if you could talk about it a little bit. I'm sure that occupies your mind too. So that's my first question. And then the second question is, when you say the management, do you want me to stop and you can talk about it, and I go one by one?
Actually, one of the things I will mention, I think, what you raise is great. And I think I think we really should make sure that we really provide a story of the Delta, not just for the Delta, but also for the state itself, and that we really are able to embrace the what role the whole entire state has in that process. And so I think that's one of the things that we've tried to get around a little bit. For example, the importance of the shipping through the port of West Sacramento and Stockton. Really, a lot of those crops are coming out of the Central Valley, and so we want to make sure that we recognize what the important, how that is all connected together.
Imagine like if there were tours organized by different school districts throughout the state, where the students come to learn about, so much on water. So my second question to you was, when you talk about that you developed a management plan, it includes a lot of things: the theme, the budget, the timing, and everything.
Right.
What is the reach of your management plan? When you do these themes, and what is the reach of it in terms of geographically and territory, and what do you cover?
I think that we anticipate that obviously we have the boundaries, and we sort of have to recognize those boundaries in terms of spending federal money. But we really think that there's an opportunity to work with other state agencies to make some of these stories something that is told on a statewide scale, and incorporates more of the Bay Area. One of the things that drives me a little nuts is that the Sacramento and Stockton, which are key parts of the Delta, aren't in the National Heritage Area. So we want to make sure, and I think it is a little bit more of a stretch, but San Francisco is not either. And I think one of the things that we have to recognize is that the power of those three metropolitan areas has really impacted the Delta a lot. So I think that would be an example of something that has a larger scale to it.
And do you do when you do your plan of reaching out, do you have specific messages for different communities, or is pretty much the same message that goes everywhere in terms of raising awareness, educational, and all that? Is it pretty much?
I think that obviously we're creating a single theme or storyline, but we obviously will be adapting that for different areas.
Okay. And then my last question is, because I don't have the knowledge of this. When you said CEQA and NEPA compliance, these are on signs, and what are the major subject matters? Just because we're dealing now with the Delta and conveyance project and CEQA and NEPA, and I'm trying to see the scale of what that is vis-a-vis CEQA and NEPA.
I would say, right now, obviously, this is a planning document. And so as a result, this will not really impact the environment in any way. Exactly. But we do anticipate that there might be projects that come out of this. For example, we might be working on restoring a building. There might be potential impacts because of that.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councilmember Runyon.
Other questions?
Yes, Councilmember Lee.
I was wondering if you had modeled your draft plan on any of the other national heritage sites.
Yes. One of the things that we wanted to make sure of when we initially selected our consulting team is that we had people who were familiar with national heritage areas. So our current consultants, our consultants throughout the entire process are affiliated with, or one is currently an executive director of Rivers of Steel in Pennsylvania, and another is a former executive director from Cane River, which is in Louisiana. So, and they are working on, they have been working on other management plans as well. So yes, we have been looking at a lot of different documents just to make sure that we're kind of that we're doing what other management plans are doing, or trying not to do what they did. Most of the time it's doing what they did, but occasionally.
And I guess my other thought is, obviously you have your federal requirements for what a heritage area plan needs to look like, and you're covering, you know, the history and kind of what it's currently doing. Is there any part of the plan that's going to be sort of future looking, or talking about kind of alignment with the state priorities for the Delta?
Yes, I think that has been something that may not be in the themes right now, but I think we anticipate that this is an ongoing story, and this is a story that's going to go on in the future. I mean, for example, one of the themes deals with climate change, and what impact is that going to have on the Delta? So I think those are things that will be future, that will be looking into the future.
Thank you, Councilmember Lee. Councilmember Burgess.
Thank you. Long time ago, before I was in politics, I actually ran a nonprofit that was a watershed group, and I got an invitation. I'd say it was 15 years ago, maybe a little less. I was invited by Senator Feinstein's office and some other folks, and met out in Stockton, and they presented this idea. Blake, I don't know the background. Was the Delta Protection Commission always a part of this, or how did the DPC get involved in that?
It's a little fuzzy.
Okay. Fuzzy for me,
I have my conjecture about what happened. I think that there was a former staffer at our commission that was had spearheaded it, but he's a very modest person, so I suspect he probably didn't. He probably hasn't said that.
The point is that this is something that happened on a state level. It wasn't something that was, you know, that the Delta Protection Commission folks started, but have carried it. And Blake has been tried and true on this, and very committed, and has tried very hard to make sure that we're not limiting. And I think even the input that he's getting today from folks is something that he'll carry on, and we'll be reviewing a bunch of documents shortly. But the other part of it is that it is evolving. We, like you said, sea level rise, climate change, saltwater intrusion, the different industries that came on. I love that the Port Chicago explosion is being included, and I would hope that sometime in the future that we can have a tour of the Port Chicago and some of the areas where a lot of these things happened, because I think growing up in Contra Costa, I was never really aware of the history that happened right in my own backyard. And I think for those of us that are members of the Delta Conservancy, making sure we're protecting and conserving and making sure, I think it's a great opportunity for us to see the highlights that the NHA is trying to promote, and getting your input, because one of the big things that we've talked about is what a big project this is, and how we do need those partnerships and expertise. And so it's nice that we're all talking about it, because I'm hoping that Delta Stewardship, there's too many Delta Protection. All of us are on board to do this. And so I appreciate you being here, Blake, and I appreciate all the work that you're doing.
Thank you. You mentioned Senator Feinstein. I would be remiss if I didn't mention that we have talked to other legislative staff about the possibility of national heritage areas in other parts of California. We really believe that we can be a role model for other areas, even if they aren't a national heritage area. I think just the approach that national heritage areas take is something that could be adopted in a lot of different places.
Blake, a couple of quick questions.
Sure.
The National Heritage Area boundary, you said Sacramento, Stockton, they're not included, but I mean, it's a big area nonetheless. I mean, it's a ginormous area.
Yes.
My question is, on your National Heritage Area Advisory Committee, what's the makeup? And is it incorporated as part of your boundary, geographic boundary? And that's part one. And part two is, do you have a member of the tribal community on your advisory committee?
Yes. So I can talk about both. In terms of one of the things that we really tried to do when we were soliciting applications initially is to get geographical diversity. And so we do have somebody from Benicia, somebody from, we actually have a National Park Service staffer who is from John Muir, who works at John Muir in Martinez. We have somebody who works at Big Break in Oakley. Trying to think of all the different people. Carol Jensen from Contra Costa County. So we've really tried to make sure that we have as diverse of a group as possible. One of the things that is challenging, I would say, is that the area of San Joaquin County that's included in the National Heritage Area is not very well populated. And so one of the things, we do have a member of the advisory committee that is from Stockton, but we recognize that, that even though he lives in Stockton, he really is somebody who kind of has a role in San Joaquin County in general. In terms of tribal participation, we do have a tribal member that is a regular member, a regular appointed member of the committee. And we've also made sure to invite, as we've gone through consultation processes, we've also made sure to call out other people as ex officio members, and so we've kept them involved in what's going on. As you probably know, they are overburdened, and they don't have a lot of, they're not blessed with a lot of time. And so we're anticipating that maybe some of the outreach that we do will have to be outside of the advisory committee.
My next question is,
Can I add to this? You asked about Stockton. There's a couple places that we would like to add, but we don't want to stop the process of getting this done. So it is our intention, hopefully in the future, to expand some of the places that seem more logical.
Yeah, makes sense.
And I'll just wanted to add on to that. One of the things that we are, if there is interest in adding portions to the National Heritage Area, we want to make sure that there is enough support on the grassroots level. So for example, there has been legislation to add a certain part of Rio Vista. It's a pretty small area, but they want to make sure that it's in the National Heritage Area, and the City Council was strongly behind it. So we want to make sure that if Stockton or Sacramento or whoever wants to be part of the National Heritage Area, that we have that support on the grassroots level.
Great. My next question is, you mentioned that, obviously you have some restrictions with regard to funding for obvious reasons, right?
Right.
But is there an opportunity, and are any other National Heritage Areas partnering, if you will, with a nonprofit And I'm thinking right now, if there's some opportunities there to be able to raise monies that are non-restricted, that
Right.
would give you some flexibility to be able to maximize on both your funding at the federal level, but being able to augment that with a nonprofit.
Yes, I would, I mean, that is one of the things that we have been considering and I think would be extremely helpful. Most national heritage areas are run by nonprofits. And so I think that there is an opportunity for us to learn from those other groups and see what we can do to work with nonprofits. And I know that there are other state agencies, state parks, for example, that do have nonprofit arms as well. So I think those are opportunities that we want to pursue.
Perfect. And then my last, because I like to think lofty and dream sometimes, but could you possibly put in a boat and a bus? We talk about, the limitations that, exist out there,
Right.
being able to put more people, more cars out there. But if there were, ways to be able to partner with the private sector, to again, be able to have those kinds of buses, boats. I'm always looking for a boat. I have one for sale if you want it. And actually, I'll donate it. And but I'm just thinking, how could you augment it and start working with the private sector too? There's nothing more enriching than been talking about it today. These tours that we go out and people really have a better appreciation and understanding of the Delta when they're actually out in the water. So, just curious if that was somewhere in the vision.
That is something that I have thought about before. And I would say that, for example, Niagara Falls National Heritage Area, they do actually have a bus route that goes throughout the area. So I think there are opportunities along those lines that we might be able to follow.
Excellent. Well, thank you again for your leadership, for your passion. I know it's something that since I first got introduced to this project, I thought, wow, this is amazing. And given that you said there's going to be the big 250th birthday of America, wow, wouldn't that be great if they highlighted all of these national heritage areas on the national platform? And yeah, I think that would just be phenomenal. I don't know, we have to check in with our Delta partners to make sure that they're all good. But yeah, it would be great to, again, be able to highlight, again, the significance of this amazing area that we call the Delta right here. Yes, Councilmember Hueso.
Thank you very much. And I've always argued that our national history tends to really focus more on how our country started in the East Coast. And we often make reference to the West as the newer part of the United States. And it really, I mean, when you look at when Europeans first arrived in the Americas, they arrived in California at least 60 years before they arrived in the East Coast of the United States. And so having this program call attention to this important geographical area, I think is going to really help to change that narrative a little bit. And just in regards to that, I know your area of influence is very defined and it has a boundary, and you're working on that area largely. It's hard really to define the Delta, especially because it's such a part of such a large watershed.
Right.
That goes as far as Oregon border, LA mountains, and we often talk about the water being from here, even if it comes from every part of the state, almost conceivably, in terms of that huge watershed. And when the Europeans first arrived to California, they found approximately about 50% of the native population living around this area, which is pretty amazing. And while the missions were not established in this area, a lot of the natives sought refuge in the Delta because they were much safer there than in other parts of the state. They were able to survive there better than in other areas, especially when there was an attempted extermination of many of those tribes. So when you look at that history, you see how important this area is and how important it's become to our economy. And I want to kind of talk a little bit of our economy because historically, although not within the boundaries of your watershed, if you look at just the boundary to the north, our current state capital is there. And you look at to the boundary to the west, you have two capitals, former capitals, Vallejo and Benicia. And then when you look at the actual estuary, you have San Jose and San Francisco that were all state capitals. And it just speaks to the geographical importance of this area and how important this comes to our economy. When you think about some of our largest industries, agriculture, rice is a really important product in that mix. Grapes, not only table grapes, but the wine industry, the largest in the United States, here in California. So my question is in really identifying this as a heritage site, do you make reference to any of those industries and the importance that this area has had in the development of our government, of our culture, of our economy? And the last question I have, will this area benefit from this designation? Will it help with tourism? Will it help with business opportunities? Will it help support the communities that are found in the Delta?
I'll sort of respond to the first question. I think that one of the things that we're keen on is to tell that total story. And so, like, for example, the importance of the Delta in terms of the gold rush. Obviously, the Delta was part of that, but obviously it was the reason why people were able to get up into the foothills easily enough. And obviously impacted San Francisco and the development of San Francisco. I think that would be at least one example of where we think the Delta has an important influence. I think another story that I think is undertold really is the story of Caterpillar. Caterpillar got started in Stockton, and the reason why I got started in Stockton is that the peat soil was so soft that basically all wheels would just sink into it. That is an example of an invention that has not just significance for California, but for the nation and for the world. And so we want to make sure that we're able to really express why these things are tremendously important. The second question, it was regarding...
In terms of the benefit to the area and to the people of the area.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's one of the things that we're really keen on is how can we benefit the Delta in some way. One of the challenges due to flood concerns is that there's a lot of these towns along the, for example, along the Sacramento River, they really can't develop. I mean, they can't build new homes there. But I think that there's an opportunity through focus on cultural heritage and tourism to be able to develop these communities in a way that is able to reuse the buildings that are already there. And you don't necessarily have to worry as much about the flooding issues. But that, I mean, and obviously that's one part of the area, but I think one of the things that we also want to focus on, I'll mention this because Chair Burgess is here, but well, I would anyway. But I think one of the things that we wanted to emphasize is the importance of Pittsburgh and Antioch and Oakley and Brentwood. And I think a lot of people think of it as just, oh, okay, well, it's just the eastern part of the Bay Area. It's where it's suburban. It's where the suburbs are growing. Antioch is one of the oldest, and Pittsburgh are one of the oldest cities in California. We want to make sure that that people are able to kind of embrace the fact that these are not just bedroom communities, but there is an opportunity to really factor in the heritage of the area when you're thinking about economic development. what can you do with these communities that can really focus on not just heritage, but I mean, if you look, I would highly recommend looking at other national heritage areas and looking at what they have done. It's amazing at some of the things that they've done. And I think they've been able to build trail systems. They've taken over, Yuma has taken over the old territorial prison because Arizona State Parks couldn't do it anymore. I think there's a lot of those examples of things that the National Heritage Area can do to sort of push along economic development in the area.
If I could just add a little footnote, historical, just briefly. There's a town named Manteca, which in Spanish is manteca, which means lard.
Yes.
Who would name a town lard, right? Well, back in the time when these towns like Pittsburgh and Manteca were formed, one of California's leading exports was lard. And back then, lard was used to make not only all these products, but this was before petroleums, right? So lard was used to grease things, it was used to cook, it was used for machinery, it was used for lots of practical applications. And so back then, lard signified wealth and progress.
Right.
And that's why Manteca was named Manteca, because of a very important commodity that was in huge production back then, including Vallejo. That's one of the products he produced.
Right.
Former General Vallejo, he produced lard for export into the international markets. Anyway, just thought a rich history of the
I would
Delta.
say, I would say every day I learned something new that I had no idea, and that is definitely something I did not know about before.
And with that, and the delicious refried beans that my mom used to make with lard, we're going to wrap this up. Again, Blake, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Obviously, a lot of engagement, a lot of interest, a lot of questions. This is a topic that I think this entire council really sees a lot of promise and opportunity. So thank you again.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. We will now, sorry. Is there any public comment on this item?
No, Madam Chair, there is not.
Great. All right. Thank you again. We will now move on to item 12, and we will now introduce our next panel speaker. And for that, we have Dr. Larson who will introduce him, but he needs no introduction. Tom, thank you for your patience.
So I'm happy to introduce Dr. Tom Holzer, one of our local Delta Independent Science Board members, to provide this, I think it's a quarterly update from the Delta Independent Science Board. Thank you, Tom.
Thanks, Laura. Virginia, I'm betting your boat is a sailboat. Is that right?
No.
Oh,
okay. We'll talk later, Tom.
Most of my friends who own sailboats.
But it does float. That's important.
Oh, that is. To the new owner, anyway. I'll be brief. I just have 3 slides that I wanted to present. And I tell you a little bit about the Delta Independent Science Board. We're part of the mandate in the Delta Reform Act. And our purpose is to provide oversight to research, monitoring, and assessments in Delta programs. So we really cover kind of a broad area, and we're fortunate that the board is a very diverse board. We range from geology to ecologists, so that we're able to, I've been impressed anyway by the range of problems that we've been able to make constructive comments on as a result of that diversity. So I think we're lucky to have a board like that. What I'm going to do is describe the primary activity of the board, which is reviews of these different things. And these reviews have been quite diverse. We're currently working on 3 reviews, and they're in various stages. And if you look at the slide, the first one, we're going to have a workshop next month in October at the Westin Hotel. And what we're focused on, the previous discussion was interesting to me from the historical perspective, because if you look at the delta, what happened from about 1860 to 1930, that's when most of the drainage of the islands occurred. And the consequence of that drainage, of course, was land subsidence. And we have about 400 square miles of the delta that sits from 10 to almost 30 feet below sea level. And most of the problems that we have in the delta today are the legacy of that. And that was basically how humans, Americans anyway, addressed marshlands and wetlands. They were things to be drained and farmed because of the productivity of the soil. Well, what's happening now in the delta is kind of interesting. What you see is multiple efforts to put water back into the delta. And one goal is to stabilize the landscape, to reduce the subsidence, which is still ongoing in the delta, and in some cases even reverse the subsidence. And so what we see are restoration efforts and changes in the pattern of farming, the kinds of crops that are farmed, that are basically trying to stabilize the landscape. And I'm going to go into a little more detail on that workshop because you might find it kind of interesting to listen in on parts of it. It is going to try and take a broad look at that challenge of what I would call re-wetting the delta. And there's a lot going on. The second review that we're engaged in, and will be a second workshop in November, is to look more holistically at the food web. When you look at how we do a lot of our studies today, if we have an endangered or listed species, we look at what they eat and we're kind of focused on that species. Well, as you might expect, nature is a lot more complicated than that. And they're fish eating that fish, and that fish eats other kinds of things. And it gets pretty complicated in a hurry. And so if you want to manage that species that you're concerned about, looking at it, how it fits into the whole upper part of the food web, since it's usually fish that we're looking at, is an important focus. And so that workshop will be looking to improve that way we make decisions in the Delta. And then the third one is probably the most challenging of the reviews. In April, I was here with Jay Lunn, and we presented a summary of our review of water supply reliability. And if you remember, a lot of it talked about coming up with assessments of risk and putting quantitative numbers on water flow. How much water will there be? Well, a lot of problems that we're confronted with today, like climate change is a good example. We really don't know even what the uncertainty is in our estimate of the future. It depends, for example, on what humans do today, what how many electric vehicles we start driving, how much CO2 we sequester, all these unanswered questions that no one can reliably predict. And so, as you might expect, scientists have gotten interested about decision making when you have those large uncertainties and how you can address those kind of problems. So the third review is focusing on that, and so far we've had a few seminars at board meetings where we've discussed that. Okay, if I can have the last slide. I want to talk a little bit about what we'll be doing in a few weeks. And this is basically addressing this problem or the challenge of re-wetting the Delta. And we have 4 panels that are going to be discussing various aspects of it. And the breadth of it is I think you'll see, kind of interesting. We're going to begin by just looking at the efforts that are currently underway. For example, there's, I think, about 300, I think it's 300 acres of wetland that we're trying to reverse the subsidence. That is, by raising the water in the wetland, the vegetation that's growing there, when it dies off, just remains and decays there and slowly accumulates. So we actually have experiments on Twitchell and Sherman Island where we're actually raising the landscape at about an inch or two a year. So when you're talking about land that's not too deeply subsided, you can actually bring that back to its wetland condition as it was just about, 150 years ago. So we'll be talking about those experiments, the challenges of it. And then in the second panel, one of the important aspects of these wetlands is they can sequester a lot of carbon. And for example, in the delta, although it only represents about 0.5% of the agricultural land in California, it generates about 6% of the carbon dioxide. Even today, it's generating that large amount. So I guess it's the baseball phrase, it's really hitting above its weight. And when you look at the way marshlands generate greenhouse gases, it actually gets pretty complicated because it turns out it's not just CO2, it's methane, it's nitrous oxide. And those latter two are really powerful greenhouse gases. And although they don't last as long, they contribute substantially to global warming. So we're going to do a deep dive into that process, because if you're trying to use the wetlands to sequester carbon, which is becoming a California state policy, you need to understand the biogeochemistry of that. The third panel will address the agricultural aspect, and we're actually inviting members from the farming community to engage in a discussion of how they make decisions about crops. You're probably aware that rice is becoming increasingly popular in the Delta as a crop because it is a wetter crop, and you don't get the amount of subsidence that you do with many of the other crops. So we're going to talk about that challenge. And then finally, and I guess I didn't realize we had Jay-Z on one of the panels. So that'll probably be the big draw. That'll be our sort of wrap up for the session, and looking at the big picture in terms of coming up with solutions to re-wetting the Delta, because I think as sea level rises and the degradation of the islands continues from the subsidence, it's just inevitable that we're going to have a wetter Delta in the future. It's just how we do it, how we manage it, and work our way through that problem. So that's what the Delta Independent Science Board is. We do other things that's sort of on the side, and I won't go into those, but very often we get requested to make comments on various plans and things, and we do our best with those. So thank you very much.
Tom, thank you so very much. A great presentation. Questions? I actually have just a couple. So these workshops that you have slated for October 19th and 20th, these are all top of mind, obviously. The sequestration, the re-wetting, the carbon sequestration continues to be another theme, another topic that continues to permeate my ears. How many people do you expect, and what's the goal in terms of the intended audience? Who is the audience?
Okay. The intended audience for it really would be, most of our reports are really aimed at, you would call it the technical managers in the Delta. I guess we're helping them think through a problem. In terms of the number of people, we've just started registration, so we don't have a good number on that, but I'm guessing probably somewhere around 50-ish.
Okay.
And the way this will be structured is it's really supposed to be a workshop, so that the panelists will be there just to sort of kick off the discussion, and most of the day will be spent in plenary discussion sessions. And it will be hybrid, so if you're interested in some particular aspect, you can log on for that.
Yeah, I'm intending to participate, so thank you. as I share with you and when I speak in front of the Independent Science Board, I always tell people that I come across and say, do you know that we have a 10-member Independent Science Board, and these are the creme of the creme. These are academia, these are scientists, men and women from all over the country that again have just an immense and just incredible background in terms of all of your specialties. You all come at it with a totally different perspective, a vision, but at the end of the day, you are a 10-member Independent Science Board that, again, we lean on, and again, really appreciate all the work that you all do and providing for us in terms of support and guidance on your review. So
Well, thank you very much.
thank you, Tom, again.
It is a very independent group, as I've noticed when we do have our discussions.
Yeah.
And Tom, today you taught us a big word, biogeochemistry. I'm gonna use this.
That'll probably be the deepest dive we'll have into science, because it turns out this issue of sequestering carbon dioxide in wetlands, it is actually a very complicated problem, and there's a time dependency to it. You don't just take a box of carbon and stick it in there. It can go on for decades in terms of the different gases that are the rates at which they're generated. And so that was the reason for the big word. It's a big problem.
Yes, Councilmember Burgess.
Hi. It strikes me, all the things that you are addressing, because what you're looking at are trying to analyze problems that occurred many, many years ago, and trying to come up with a way to fix those things. At the same time, you're trying to address current needs, current issues, and then also advising on helping us do better in the future.
Exactly.
And so it's really fascinating. And the other thing that strikes me is that for a long time, everybody had their own science. They had their own data. They were analyzing it and pointing it in certain directions. And I love that we have this independent science board, truly independent, with such an expansion of knowledge and interests that it helps us all come together. And so what you're providing is giving people access to that science so that they can participate and challenge or, become more informed. And you're helping us all kind of come together. And so I really am grateful for the work that you're doing.
Well, thank you.
Thank you again very much, Tom, for that presentation. And I will now ask if there are any public comment on this item.
No, Madam Chair, there is not.
Great, thank you. Okay, that leads us to our last item, item 13, preparation for our next council meeting. The next council meeting will take place October 26th, 27th, again here at the California Natural Resources Building, 715 P Street. Please refer to posted meeting notice 10 days before the meeting for further information and updates. And with that, this meeting is now officially adjourned. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you for running